Ancient Greece is often remembered as the birthplace of great ideas. Democracy, philosophy, art, and literatures, these pillars of civilization, all trace their roots to the Greek city-states. Names like Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle still echo, through time, as symbols of wisdom and human progress. But while Greece was a land of brilliance, it was also a place of contradictions. Behind the glowing marble statues and noble ideas were darker truths, harsh realities that most history books avoid. For every school that taught logic and science, there were silent courtyards where the weak were broken. For every ode to freedom, there were chains hidden from view. This chapter takes us to the beginning of our journey, understanding how a society so celebrated for intellect and freedom could allow, even justify systems of cruelty and domination, especially toward those with no voice children. A world of cities. Not a single nation. Ancient Greece wasn't one unified country. Instead, it was a patchwork of powerful city-states like Athens, Sparta, Corinth, and Thebes. Each city had its own rules, customs, and culture. But they shared a common language, belief in the gods, and a sense of superiority over other cultures. Athens was famous for its thinkers and its form of democracy. Sparta, on the other hand, was built on military power. Both these cities had a dark underside when it came to how they treated children, especially boys who were not born into wealth or privilege. Children in these societies had very little control over their lives. Their value was often judged by how useful they could become to the city. For many, their path was chosen the moment they were born, not by dreams or talents, but by their status, gender, and sometimes even the appearance of their bodies. Ideal of beauty and its consequences in ancient Greeks had a very strong idea of what beauty looked like, especially in young boys. Art from the time shows boys as symbols of innocence, grace, and physical perfection. Statues of young male figures stood tall in temples and marketplaces. Poets wrote verses praising the beauty of boys in glowing terms. But this obsession with beauty wasn't always innocent. It created a culture where physical appearance became a dangerous currency. Boys who matched these ideals were often treated differently, not always better. Their beauty could attract powerful men who saw them not as children, but as objects, to be desired, owned, or trained in many cases. This led to relationships between adult men and young boys that were considered normal at the time. These relationships were given a name, stand, were even written about by respected philosophers. Today, we understand how troubling and harmful this was, especially for the children involved. But in ancient Greece, it was seen by many as part of a boy's education or social growth, enslavement from a young age in addition to this cultural pressure. Another harsh reality loomed large over many children's slavery. Enslaved boys were often taken from foreign lands during war or bought in marketplaces. They had no rights, no freedom, and were completely at the mercy of their owners. Unlike citizens' children, enslaved boys didn't go to school or train. For future careers, instead, they were made to serve. Some worked in homes, others in fields or workshops. A few, especially those considered attractive or well-behaved, were brought into elite households where they served their masters closely. These boys were often very young, some just 7 or 8 years old. They were given new names, stripped of their past, and told to obey. If they failed to meet expectations, they could be punished without reason. Their lives were not considered valuable, and there was little sympathy for their suffering. Silence. And normalization, perhaps the most haunting part of this system, was how normal it became. There were no protests in the streets, no philosophers questioning whether children deserved better. Society, even the parents of the children, often accepted it as just the way things were. Religious beliefs and cultural traditions helped to justify it. Some said the gods approved of such arrangements. Others believed that these practices helped boys grow into better men. Many simply turned a blind eye to what they saw in wealthy households or royal courts. A few voices who might have seen something wrong were drowned out by the louder voices. Praising tradition and power, the forgotten and the praise, it is a strange contrast. On one side, we have shining temples, grand speeches, and beautiful artwork still admired today. On the other, we have lost voices children who lived and died unseen, remembered only in whispers, or not at all. We cannot tell the story of ancient Greece honestly without including both sides. It was a place of learning, beauty, and light, but also a world where many suffered, especially those too young to protect themselves. This chapter ends here, but the journey into the truth is just beginning. In the grand homes of ancient Athens, where marble floors glistened and philosophy echoed in high-ceilinged rooms, not everything was as noble as it seemed. Beneath the beauty and order of Greek domestic life lay a hidden, comfortable truth. Many households held young boys as domestic slaves. These boys were often taken from conquered lands or purchased in bustling slave markets. They were brought into Greek homes to serve silently, obediently, and invisibly. Their duties were numerous. From early morning until nightfall, they cleaned, cooked, fetched water, and served food to their masters. These boys were rarely older than 10, and their small size made them ideal for tight corners or balancing trays in crowded symposiums. To outsiders, they were simply household helpers. But in reality, they lived lives of quiet endurance under the control of powerful adults. In many homes, these boys were stripped of any identity they once had. Their names were changed often, replaced with Greek names that suited their owners' preferences. They were not allowed to speak unless spoken to, and discipline was strict. A mistake dropping a cup, speaking out of turn could lead to harsh punishment, and yet these punishments were normalized in society. The rights of these boys did not exist under Athenian law. They were property, not people. Some of these boys were assigned to serve elite members of the family, especially older men during social events. These were the famed symposia, exclusive drinking parties, where philosophers, poets, and politicians debated ideas while reclining on plush couches. The presence of young boys at these events was so common, it was rarely questioned. They poured wine, provided entertainment, and were expected to remain silent and graceful throughout the night. The boys were dressed in clean tunics, their hair neatly styled, their presence a symbol of status for their masters. The guests rarely considered the toll it took on these young minds. Imagine a boy, perhaps 9 years old, serving wine to men, twice his height, hearing laughter and philosophical musings he couldn't understand. Behind his composed face might be fear, exhaustion, or a longing for home if he even remembered it. But in Athens, such emotions were irrelevant. Order and dot 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 whatever will sound wow dot dot dot. Beauty mattered more than compassion. For some boys, their duties extended into more personal areas of their master's life. Though records speak of this cautiously and in veiled terms, many historians now agree that these boys were often made to serve as close, personal attendants, sometimes even sharing private spaces with their owners. In many homes, the line between nada da 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 and sometimes the line between nada da da way forward is into someone and nada da da itha da da tendance nada da 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 nata 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 tata nata nata home data 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 bada data bada. Servitude and personal intrusion was thin. These were the parts of Greek society that weren't carved into marble or recorded in glory-filled poetry. One must remember, the Greek world was structured to favor free male citizens above all. Women had limited roles, and slaves had none. The youngest slaves, especially foreign boys, were at the very bottom. Their suffering wasn't considered important enough to record in history. We only learn about them through brief mentions. In plays, philosophical texts, and, most tellingly, in legal documents dealing with theft or punishment. Their humanity was an afterthought. In larger households, a single boy might be responsible for caring for all of a master's daily needs, dressing him, preparing his bath, cleaning his sandals, and organizing his scrolls. These boys were expected to be quiet, efficient, and ever-present. If they performed well, they were sometimes given small rewards, better food, or the rare chance to rest. Even then, they remained slaves. There was no true path to freedom unless their master felt unusually kind, which was rare. Occasionally, wealthy Greeks would write about their deep affection for a particular young servant. But these expressions, though poetic, reveal an unsettling relationship, one where affection was tied to obedience and control. The boy's value came from his ability to please, not from who he was as a person. It is within these poetic praises that we see a reflection of deeper social imbalances. Love, when shaped by ownership, is not love it. All it is control wearing a softer mask. Outside the home, these boys rarely mingled with society. They were not educated with other children. They couldn't play freely in the agora, and they didn't attend public events unless working. Their childhoods, if we can call them that, were filled with duties rather than dreams. Their silence was expected, and their memories often faded with time, leaving no trace in history books. And yet, despite the oppression, some of these boys found small ways to survive. They learned the language quickly. They memorized the habits of their masters. Some became skilled at predicting moods or avoiding danger. They grew clever, not because they were taught, but because they had to be. It was survival, not schooling, that made them wise. Historians today face difficulty in fully reconstructing the lives of these boys. Most sources come from the writings of elites, people who saw no problem with the system. There are no diaries. From the boys themselves, no letters home, no stories in their own voices. We must read between the lines and listen to what is not said to grasp their reality. What we do know is that ancient Greece, while remembered for its intellectual triumphs, was also a society built on unspoken pain. The very same hands that carved philosophy into scrolls also clutched chains of power over the young. The story of Greece is not only one of brilliance, it is also one of forgotten children, hidden in shadows. Chapter 3. The silent schoolrooms of the enslaved education in ancient Greece is often romanticized as the cradle of Western knowledge, a golden age, where young boys studied poetry, rhetoric, and logic under wise teachers. But this vision tells only part of the story. While freeborn boys of Athens learned to argue in the marketplace or recite Homer under the olive trees, another group of boys, enslaved boys, watched silently from the margins, forbidden to learn the very ideas that shaped the civilization they served. These enslaved children were deliberately kept away from formal education. Their Greek masters didn't want them growing too intelligent. Knowledge could give a boy questions. Questions could lead to resistance. For this reason, slave boys were rarely taught to read or write, unless their duties required it. Instead, their schooling consisted of obedience, silence, and survival. Some slave boys were used within the education system itself, assistants in schools run by philosophers or scribes. These children swept the floors, cleaned the teacher's sandals, and prepared writing materials for the students. Their job was to serve without being noticed. While free boys recited verses from memory, slave boys knelt in the shadows, erasing chalk or carrying messages to parents. They were present but invisible. There are even accounts of elite Athenian boys being accompanied to school by their own enslaved companions, known as pedagogoi. These attendants, often older male slaves, walked their masters to and from school, ensured they behaved, and helped carry scrolls. But in some rare cases, especially in wealthier households, younger slave boys also filled this role, witnessing lessons they could never participate in. They listened as Aristotle or Plato were quoted, understanding perhaps little but absorbing the tone, the rhythm, the weight of Greek ideas. And sometimes in the stillness of these classrooms, a spark would light. A clever boy might quietly begin learning, memorizing letters as he handed a wax tablet, or imitating math problems scribbled on sand. But this knowledge had no outlet. There was no future where a slave boy became a philosopher. His mind, no matter how sharp, remained confined by the expectations of his status. Even so, some Greek masters valued highly obedient, intelligent slave boys, particularly if they could serve in specialized roles. A boy who showed aptitude might be taught enough Greek to serve as a secretary, scribe, or personal assistant. These roles came with slight improvements in treatment, perhaps fewer beatings, better food, or even a private corner to sleep. The intellectual work they did was not considered their own. Everything they wrote belonged to their master. The tragedy deepens when we understand that many of these boys came from cultures that also valued learning. Some were taken from Persia, Egypt, or Thrace civilizations with rich traditions of storytelling, mathematics, and astronomy. Their native knowledge was erased, replaced by obedience to the Greek system. Even their own languages were stripped from them, replaced by the tongue of their captors. Unlike the free boys who were encouraged to question, explore, and debate, slave boys were trained not to think beyond the next task. Curiosity could be dangerous. It's asking the wrong question, or even being seen watching a lesson too closely could invite punishment. It was not uncommon for masters to beat or humiliate a boy who seemed too interested in the world around him. Silence was not just preferred, it was enforced. What did this do to a child's mind? To be surrounded by knowledge but forbidden? To engage with it? To hear music but not be allowed to play it? To copy letters but never write your own name? These questions haunt modern historians. We cannot know for certain how many of these boys longed to learn, but we know that the system made sure they could not. There were, of course, exceptions, stories passed down in whispers about slave boys who gained favor through intelligence. Some were eventually freed and became tutors or scribes. But these stories were rare and often rewritten to glorify the generosity of the master, not the brilliance of the boy. The majority lived and died without ever holding a book for their own sake. The image of a young Greek boy learning geometry beside a marble pillar has become iconic, but beside him, history forgets the barefoot child who carried his ink and cleaned his seat. That boy had eyes just as wide, a brain just as bright, but no scrolls, no voice. It's no future. The education system in ancient Greece, though revolutionary in some respects, was built on a system of exclusion, taught some boys to become citizens and others to remain silent. And in that silence we see a reflection of how power protects itself. And by denying knowledge to the enslaved, Greek society ensured that its hierarchy would remain unchallenged. The same philosophers who wrote about justice, ethics, and the soul rarely extended those ideas to the small boy sweeping their floor. It is perhaps the greatest contradiction of ancient Greece that the birthplace of reason also fostered one of the most methodical forms of intellectual suppression ever imposed on children. The Greek gymnasium, a symbol of youth, strength, and civic pride, was far more than a place for exercise. It was a cultural institution, a training ground, where the body was sculpted and the mind prepared for citizenship. To the outside world, the gymnasium was the pride of Greek cities. But for some boys, particularly the most vulnerable, it also served as a place of silent fear, its unspoken boundaries, and uneven power. In these wide open-air courtyards, Greek boys trained in wrestling, discus, running, and other athletic skills. Often under the gaze of older men trainers, philosophers, and spectators alike, the boys were typically naked, as was customary in Greek athletics. This physical exposure, normalized in the name of strength and competition, also created a complex environment, one where admiration, discipline, and inappropriate power dynamics dangerously blurred together among the rows of marble columns and sun-drenched walls. Boys were praised for their form, agility, and potential. Those from wealthy families were often accompanied by private instructors or even enslaved boys who carried their towels and water jars. The presence of hierarchy was clear: who had control, who was being watched, and who had no voice at all. The gymnasium was also a meeting point for men who claimed to be lovers of beauty, many of whom idealized youthful male form and spirit. Philosophers like Plato even wrote about the affection between older men and boys, portraying it as an intellectual bond. But in reality, these ideals could open the door to troubling behavior where admiration became obsession, and power was disguised as mentorship. Boys, especially those without families or those who were enslaved, were the most at risk. They lacked protection, and if someone of status showed them attention, there were few who could intervene. While official laws forbade exploitation, enforcement was weak and inconsistent. The culture of silence, status, and shame often kept victims from speaking out. Reputation mattered more than justice. Some boys were flattered by the attention, seeing it as a path to favor or opportunity. A wealthy patron might sponsor their education or offer gifts. But this exchange of power often came with expectations, and spoken, or otherwise. And in the rigid world of Greek society, saying no to someone with influence wasn't always a real option. There were trainers who upheld discipline, cared deeply for their students. There were schools that emphasized ethics and philosophy. But these could not erase the fact that in many gymnasiums, power ran unchecked. What appeared to be mentorship could mask control, and what seemed like admiration could become manipulation. For enslaved boys serving in the gymnasium, life was even more complex. They cleaned the grounds, helped with training tools, and were expected to remain invisible. Yet they were constantly exposed to the dynamics unfolding around them. While others trained for glory, these boys worked in silence, sometimes mocked, often ignored the rituals of the gymnasium oil rubbing, wrestling matches, and training exercise. It's created spaces of constant physical closeness. Without strong moral safeguards, these environments sometimes turned into opportunities for exploitation. Rather than education, the gymnasium was meant to build the ideal citizen, but it could also mask the failings of the society that created it. Many citizens believed they were creating strong, virtuous men, but the unspoken realities of power and silence within these spaces tell a different story. Not every boy left the gymnasium stronger. Some left with quiet trauma, having learned not about strength, but about survival in a world that saw them as objects of admiration or tools of status. As we walk through the ruins of ancient gymnasiums today, the stones may be silent, but the history they witnessed is not. The power structures that shaped these spaces still echo in their foundations. Understanding these realities helps us see the full picture, not just of physical training, but of social inequality, vulnerability, and silence. The gymnasium, like so many institutions in ancient Greece, carried within it both brilliance and blindness. It was a place where bodies were celebrated and sometimes exploited, a place of learning and also of imbalance. It tells us that even the most admired traditions can have darker truths hidden just beneath their polished surface.